The story of the 1968 Roosevelt dime is not simply the story of a small piece of metal struck by the United States Mint. It is the story of a nation transitioning through a period of immense social change. It is the continuation of a design that symbolized honor to a president who guided America through one of its darkest hours. And it is a reflection of the economic realities and minting innovations of the late 20th century. To understand why the 1968 dime matters, we must first step back to 1946, the year the Roosevelt dime was introduced. Franklin Delano Roosevelt had passed away in April 1945 after leading the country through the Great Depression, and most of World War II, his image was chosen to appear on the dime partly because of his enduring legacy as a wartime leader, and partly because of his personal connection to the March of Dimes, a charitable effort that sought to fight polio, a disease Roosevelt himself struggled with throughout his life. The new dime was both a tribute and a national symbol of perseverance. When we arrive at 1968, more than 2 decades had passed since the first Roosevelt dime entered circulation, but the world in which the coin was struck had changed dramatically. The United States was in the midst of the Vietnam War. Cities across the country were rocked by protests. The civil rights movement was still reshaping society, and a wave of cultural revolution was sweeping through American life. The dime struck in this year reflects that transitional period not only in its design but also in its composition and minting practices. Up until 1964, United States dimes were struck in 90% silver, but due to rising silver prices and a shortage of coins in circulation, the government made the controversial decision to switch to a copper-nickel-clad composition beginning in 1965. The dime was no longer precious metal, but a sandwich of copper and nickel bonded together, which gave it a silvery appearance but stripped it of its intrinsic value. By 1968, the clad Roosevelt dime had already been circulating for 3 years, and the transition was largely accepted by the public. Though collectors mourned the end of silver coinage, the 1968 dime is particularly important because it was the first year that proof coins were once again struck at the San Francisco Mint after a hiatus from 1965 to 1967. During those 3 years, special mint sets replaced proof coinage. But in 1968, the Mint resumed proof production with the S Mint mark proudly stamped on the reverse. This decision marked a revival of traditional numismatic artistry and gave collectors a reason to once again celebrate new issues. The proof 1968 dime in particular holds a special place in coin history, as it represents a turning point in modern minting. Another key development in 1968 was the return of mint marks after a period when mint marks were removed to discourage hoarding collectors. Remember that from 1965 through 1967, no mint marks were used on dimes, nickels, quarters, or half dollars. But beginning in 1968, the Denver Mint and San Francisco Mint resumed placing their identifying letters D and S on coins, while the Philadelphia Mint remained without a mint mark. This makes the 1968 dime historically significant because it was part of the first wave of modern clad coinage to carry mint marks once again, and this detail helps modern numismatists trace its origins. When examining the 1968 dime, we must also consider its design. The obverse features John R. Sinnock's portrait of Franklin Roosevelt, a design first engraved in the mid-1940s, with Roosevelt facing left. His profile strong and commanding beneath his chin are the inscriptions, "Liberty and in God we trust," and the date, 1968. Along with the designer's initials, JS, the reverse, features the torch of liberty, flanked by an olive branch representing peace, and an oak branch symbolizing strength and independence above it, reads, United States of America, while the motto E pluribus unum reminds us of unity in diversity. The denomination 1 dime appears at the bottom. This design, simple yet powerful, has endured for decades, making the 1968 dime not only a circulating coin, but also an enduring artistic expression of American ideals. In terms of mintage, the 1968 dimes were struck in large numbers at the Philadelphia and Denver mints, with hundreds of millions entering circulation. The San Francisco Mint, however, struck proof coins in much smaller numbers for collectors, and these proof dimes stand out today for their sharp strike mirrored fields and frosted devices. Yet even among these massive mintages, there are rare varieties and errors that bring excitement to collectors. Some 1968 dimes have been discovered with striking issues, off-center strikes, clipped planchets, and die varieties, creating a whole field of study within modern numismatics. The proof 1968 S dime in particular is known for the extremely rare no S variety where the mint mark was accidentally omitted. These no S dimes are highly sought after, commanding thousands of dollars at auction and making the 1968 series one of the most valuable modern dimes to search for. The economic backdrop of 1968 also plays into the coin's importance. Inflation was rising. The United States was spending heavily on the Vietnam War, and the value of silver continued to increase in global markets, making the clad composition of coins a practical necessity rather than a temporary solution. Americans were adjusting to a world where their coinage no longer held intrinsic precious metal value. Yet the dime remained a vital part of daily commerce. Vending machines, parking meters, payphones all demanded the 10-cent piece, and so millions of Americans interacted daily with the very coin that collectors now view as historic. From a historical perspective, the 1968 dime captures both continuity and change. It continues the Roosevelt design unbroken since 1946. It continues the copper-nickel-clad system first introduced in 1965, but it also marks the return of mint marks. It marks the revival of proof coinage. It introduces rare varieties that would become legendary in numismatic circles, and it exists in a year that was one of the most turbulent in American history. The assassinations of Martin Luther King Jr. and Robert F. Kennedy, the protests at the Democratic National Convention, the height of the space race, and the struggles of a society divided all unfolded, while these very dimes were struck, circulated, and carried in the pockets of Americans' collectors. Today prize the 1968 dime, not only for its design but for what it represents. It is a coin that bridges the gap between silver and clad, between old minting traditions and modern techniques, between an America still rooted in the past and one rapidly moving into a new era. To hold a 1968 dime is to hold a piece of that history, a reminder of a nation in transition, and a tribute to Franklin Roosevelt, whose image has endured on the dime longer than any other president has endured on a circulating coin.